Tonight, the frontier calls again, a land where shadows test the brave, and every heartbeat echoes with survival. In James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans, empires clash, cultures collide, and the fate of many rests on the courage of a few. Since 1826, this tale has burned with the same fire, a story of loyalty, honor, and the wilderness that can both protect and betray. From the timeless archives of Project Gutenberg, preserved for every listener, the adventure lives on. So let the fog drift low, let the war drums thunder once more. This is The Last of the Mohicans, Episode 4. When the first shock of their capture had passed, Duncan began to study the appearance and behavior of their enemies. Contrary to the usual customs of triumphant warriors, the captors had spared not only the trembling sisters, but also himself. The ornaments of his uniform were handled again and again by eager hands, eyes glowing with desire to seize them. Yet before violence could be done, the commanding voice of the large warrior restrained the impulse, convincing Duncan that they were being reserved for some greater purpose. While the younger and more vain among the Hurons indulged their passion for finery, the older warriors searched both caverns with restless energy. Their movements showed they were unsatisfied with the spoils already gained. Failing to find new victims, they turned to the prisoners, demanding with fierce voices the name of La Longue Carabin. Duncan pretended not to understand their repeated questions, while David, ignorant of French, was spared the effort of deception. At last, weary of their persistence and fearing to anger them with silence, Duncan looked about for Magua, hoping he might interpret. The conduct of this man stood apart from the rest. While others plundered the scouts' poor belongings or searched with savage eagerness for his absent form, Le Renard Subtle remained at a distance. His calm, satisfied air betrayed that he had already achieved the dark purpose of his treachery. When Duncan's eyes met his, he turned away in horror at the sinister composure he saw. Yet mastering his disgust, he forced himself to address the man who had betrayed them. Magua listened with quiet triumph. He told Duncan that the warriors sought the hunter who knew the forest paths. They demanded La Longue Carabin, whose rifle was deadly and whose eye never closed. Yet, he added with a cruel smile, even such skill was nothing against the life of Le Subtle. His hand pressed the leaves bound to his wounded shoulder, as though to remind his prisoner of the injury he had suffered. Duncan answered with forced composure, saying that a brave warrior should not remember wounds received in battle, nor the hands that gave them. But Magua's dark eyes burned as he replied with bitter scorn. He asked if it was war when a weary Indian rested beneath the sugar tree, only to be surrounded by creeping foes. He recalled the knife drawn by one whose tongue spoke peace while his heart was filled with blood. He demanded if Magua had said the hatchet was raised or that his hand had dug it from the ground. Duncan held his silence. He would not remind Magua of his treachery, nor stoop to plead for mercy. The Huron seemed content to let the matter rest, leaning once more against the rock with quiet satisfaction. But the cry of La Longue Carabin rose again, fierce and impatient, as the warriors demanded the life of the hunter. Magua spoke with cold indifference, saying the Hurons would have the long rifle or the blood of the one who hit him. Duncan answered that the scout had escaped, far beyond their reach. Magua's lips curled in contempt. He declared that even the ghosts of enemies could be tormented, and demanded the body, the scalp, the proof of death. Duncan repeated that the man had escaped. The Huron shook his head. Was the hunter a bird to fly, or a fish to swim without air? He mocked the white man's books, calling them foolish. Duncan retorted that though no fish, the long rifle could swim. He had floated down the stream when the powder was gone and the Huron's eyes were blinded. Magua pressed further, asking why Duncan himself had stayed. Was he stoned, sinking to the bottom, or was his scalp burning on his head? Provoked, Duncan answered with pride, saying that only cowards deserted their women. Magua muttered darkly, then asked if the Delawares could swim as well as crawl in the bushes, or was Little Gross Serpent. Duncan, realizing his companions were better known to the Hurons than to himself, replied reluctantly that the elder Mohican had also gone with the water. Magua demanded next for Loose Surf Agile. Duncan feigned ignorance, seizing the chance to delay. Magua struggled with the name, then explained it was Uncas, the young Mohican, the bounding elk. Duncan, hoping to prolong the exchange, spoke of confusion in French words for deer, stag, and elk. Magua dismissed such talk as the chatter of pale faces who needed two words for one thing. A red man, he said, made his voice speak plainly. The deer was swift but weak, the elk swift and strong, and the son of the serpent was the nimble deer. Had he leapt the river to the woods? Duncan answered that if Magua meant the younger Delaware, he too had gone with the water. The Huron accepted this readily, for such an escape was not impossible to his mind. Yet among the other warriors, the feeling was far different. Their anger and disappointment showed how little they valued the captives who remained. The Hurons had listened to the brief exchange with patient silence, until the entire band seemed hushed. When Duncan ceased to speak, every eye turned to Magua, demanding an explanation. With a gesture toward the river and a few words, he conveyed the result. The truth, once understood, brought a furious yell. The savages raged at their disappointment. Some rushed to the water's edge, striking the air with wild gestures. Others spat upon the stream, as if the element itself had betrayed their rights as conquerors. A few of the fiercest warriors turned their dark looks upon the captives. Their eyes burned with passion, restrained only by habit. One or two even raised menacing gestures toward the sisters, against which neither beauty nor helplessness offered protection. Duncan, bound and powerless, made a desperate effort to reach Alice when he saw a hand twist in her flowing hair, a knife circling her head as if to claim its ornament. But the iron grip of the leader pressed his shoulder, holding him fast. Realizing the futility of resistance, he submitted, whispering soft words of comfort to calm the sisters, reminding them that threats often exceeded deeds. Yet Duncan did not deceive himself. He knew the authority of an Indian chief rested less on law than on strength. At any moment, a rash hand might strike, sacrificing a victim to the memory of a fallen friend. Outwardly, he kept calm, but his heart leapt whenever a savage drew too near the sisters, or when their wandering eyes lingered on the fragile forms so defenseless against harm. Relief came when the leader summoned his warriors to council. Their deliberation was brief, their decision swift. By the silence of most, it was clear the choice was unanimous. The frequent gestures toward the direction of Webb's camp revealed their fear of danger from that quarter. This thought likely hastened their resolve and quickened their movements. During this pause, Duncan found a moment's respite from his worst fears. He even noted with reluctant admiration the caution with which the Hurons had advanced, their vigilance unbroken even after the fight had ended. The upper half of the island was bare rock, offering no defense but a few scattered logs of driftwood. It was here the Hurons had chosen to descend, carrying their canoe through the woods around the cataract to reach this point. Their weapons were placed inside the vessel, while a dozen men clung to its sides, trusting themselves to the skill of two warriors who guided the craft with steady hands. From their positions, these pilots commanded a full view of the dangerous passage. Favored by numbers and armed with firearms, they reached the head of the island at the very spot where their first adventurers had perished. Duncan quickly understood the manner of their descent, for the Hurons now lifted the light canoe from the upper end of the rock and set it in the water near the mouth of the outer cavern. The leader motioned for the captives to enter. Resistance was useless and protest in vain. Heyward gave the example of submission, stepping first into the canoe. The sisters followed, with David still bewildered by all that had passed. Though unfamiliar with the hidden channels among the eddies and rapids, the Hurons read the signs of the current with practiced eyes. Their knowledge of the river's language was enough to keep them from serious error. The chosen pilot took his place, and the band plunged once more into the stream. The canoe glided swiftly with the current, steady under the guidance of its helmsman. The captives sat in silence, borne helplessly along. The roar of the falls faded behind them, replaced by the steady rush of the river. In a few moments, the little vessel touched the southern bank. They had crossed nearly opposite the point where they had first struck the stream on the evening before. The captives were once again on unfamiliar ground, surrounded by their enemies, and carried deeper into the wilderness. Another brief but serious council was held. The horses, whose panic had caused the greatest misfortune, were led out from the woods and brought to a sheltered place. The band then divided. The great chief, so often mentioned, mounted Heyward's charger and crossed the river. Most of his followers went with him. They vanished into the forest, leaving the prisoners under the guard of 6 warriors, commanded by Lew Renard Subtle. Duncan watched these movements with growing uneasiness. He had once believed, from the unusual restraint of the savages, that he was being kept as a prisoner to be delivered to Montcalm. Misery rarely allows the mind to rest, and hope, however faint, often fuels invention. Duncan had even imagined that Munro's parental feelings might be used to draw him away from loyalty to the king. The French commander was known for courage and daring, but also for skill in political maneuvers. Such practices often ignored the finer rules of morality and stained the diplomacy of Europe in that age. These thoughts and speculations were now destroyed by the actions of his captors. The part of the band that followed the towering warrior moved toward the foot of the Horican. For Duncan and his companions, no hope remained except that they were to be held as captives by their conquerors. Eager to know the worst, and willing to test the power of gold in such a crisis, Duncan forced himself to speak to Magua. The former guide now carried himself with the authority of one directing the party's future course. Duncan addressed him with tones as friendly and trusting as he could manage. He wished to speak words meant only for a chief of such rank. Magua turned his eyes on the young soldier with scorn. The warrior's look alone carried the weight of his reply. Duncan pressed further in thought. He reflected that the Hurons were not deaf, and that counsel fit for the great men of a nation might intoxicate the younger warriors. If Magua refused to listen, then the officer of the king knew how to remain silent. The savage spoke carelessly to his comrades. They were clumsy in their efforts, yet busy preparing the horses for the sisters. Then he moved aside, giving a cautious signal that drew Heyward to follow. Magua allowed him to speak, but only if the words were worthy of a chief. Heyward began with praise. He believed Lew Renard Subtle had lived up to the honorable name given by his Canadian fathers. He saw wisdom in all that had been done, and he promised to remember it when the time for reward arrived. To him, Renard had shown himself not only a leader in council, but also one who could outwit his enemies. The Indian demanded to know what Renard had truly done. Heyward's thoughts unfolded quickly. He recalled how the woods had been filled with enemy scouts, and how no serpent could pass unseen. Renard had lost his path to blind the Hurons. He had pretended to return to the tribe that once cast him out like a dog. When his purpose became clear, the others had aided him by wearing false faces, so the Hurons might believe the white man thought his friend an enemy. By such wisdom, Lew Subtle had closed the eyes and ears of his nation. They forgot the wrongs they had once done him. They forgot how they had driven him to the Mohawks. They left him on the south side of the river with his prisoners, while they foolishly crossed to the north. Heyward believed Renard now meant to turn back like a fox and deliver the daughters of the gray-headed Scotchman to their father. Gratitude filled Heyward's mind. He imagined how such wisdom and honesty should be repaid. The chief of William Henry would reward as a great leader should. Magua's medal would no longer be tin, but gold. His horn would overflow with powder. His pouch would be heavy with dollars, as countless as the pebbles on the shore of Mohicans. Even the deer would come to his hand, knowing it was useless to flee from the rifle he carried. Heyward struggled to add his own promise. He hesitated, searching for a gift that might equal the gratitude of Munro. The Huron watched closely, pressing him to finish. At last, Heyward imagined the firewater from the islands of the Salt Lake flowing before Magua's lodge. He pictured the Indian's heart lighter than the feathers of a hummingbird, and his breath sweeter than the wild honeysuckle. Lou Renard listened gravely as Heyward unfolded his subtle words. When the young officer spoke of the artifice he believed the Huron had used against his own people, the listener's face grew guarded and solemn. At the mention of the wrongs that had driven him from his tribe, a sudden flash of ferocity lit his eyes. Heyward believed he had touched the right chord. By the time he blended vengeance with the promise of gain, he had secured the deepest attention of the savage. The questions that followed carried the calm dignity of an Indian chief. Yet the thoughtful look on Lou Renard's face revealed how carefully the answers had been shaped. He mused for a moment, then laid his hand on the rough bandages of his wounded shoulder. His gestures and thoughts seemed to ask whether friends could leave such marks, whether hunters would strike so lightly at enemies, and whether warriors crept upon those they loved like serpents. He seemed to question if the Delaware would be heard by ears meant to be deaf, or if the white chief would fire powder in the faces of his brothers. Duncan, with a show of sincerity, reflected that such a man never missed his aim when intent on killing. A long pause followed these sharp exchanges. Duncan saw hesitation in the Huron. Hoping to secure his victory, he prepared to repeat the promises of reward. But Magua silenced him with a gesture. The chief declared that his wisdom would be shown in deeds, and that silence must be kept until he chose to speak. Heyward quickly withdrew, aware that Magua's eyes were fixed on the rest of the band. He wished to avoid any sign of secret alliance. The Huron then turned to the horses, praising the efforts of his comrades with feigned approval. Soon he signaled Heyward to help the sisters mount, for he rarely used the English tongue unless driven by strong purpose. There was no excuse left for delay. Duncan obeyed, though with reluctance. As he lifted the trembling sisters into their saddles, he whispered faint words of hope. The young women, fearful of meeting the fierce gaze of their captors, kept their eyes lowered to the ground. David's mare had been taken by the followers of the great chief, leaving its owner, like Duncan, to walk on foot. Yet Duncan did not wholly regret this, for it might allow him to slow the march. His heart still turned toward Fort Edward, straining for some sound that might signal approaching aid. When all was ready, Magua gave the order to move. He advanced in front, leading the way with authority. David followed, his senses clearing as the pain of his wound faded. Behind him rode the sisters, with Heyward close at their side. The Indians flanked the group, closing the march with tireless caution, their vigilance unbroken as they pressed deeper into the forest. They moved on in silence. Only at times did Heyward whisper a word of comfort to the sisters, or David released the mournful sounds of his spirit, uttering cries meant to show humble resignation. Their path turned south, almost opposite to the road that led to William Henry. Though Magua seemed to follow the plan of his conquerors, Heyward could not believe his tempting offer was already forgotten. He knew too well the winding ways of an Indian trail, and how its first direction rarely revealed its true end. Mile after mile passed in the endless forest. The march was painful, and no sign appeared that their journey would soon end. Heyward watched the sun as it pierced the branches at noon, longing for the moment when Magua's policy might shift toward a course more favorable to his hopes. At times he imagined the wary chief, unwilling to risk Montcalm's army, was leading them instead toward a border settlement. There, Sir William Johnson, a powerful officer of the Crown and ally of the Six Nations, held his lands and his home. To fall into Johnson's hands seemed far better than to be carried into the wilds of Canada. Yet even that hope required many weary leagues through the forest, each step taking Heyward farther from the war and farther from his post of honor and duty. Cora alone remembered the scout's parting advice. Whenever she could, she bent aside the twigs that brushed her hands. But the vigilance of the Indians made this both difficult and dangerous. Often she was forced to abandon the attempt, disguising her movements as gestures of fear when their sharp eyes caught her. Only once did she succeed. She broke a branch of sumac and, with sudden thought, let her glove fall at the same moment. The sign was noticed. One of her guards returned the glove, broke the rest of the bush to resemble the struggle of an animal, and then touched his tomahawk with a look so threatening that it ended all further attempts at leaving secret marks. Since both bands of Indians had horses, their trail was already marked by hoof prints. This discovery destroyed any remaining hope that help might follow by tracking their passage. Heyward longed to protest, but Magua's dark reserve gave no encouragement. The Huron never spoke, rarely even looked back. Guided by the sun, or by signs known only to native instinct, he pressed forward. He moved through pine barrens, across fertile valleys, over streams and hills, with the certainty of a bird in flight. The path might vanish or lie beaten and clear. It made no difference. His speed never faltered. Fatigue seemed powerless against him. Whenever the weary travelers lifted their eyes, they saw his dark figure gliding ahead, his head fixed forward, the light plume on his crest fluttering in the air, stirred only by his own swift motion. At last, the purpose of such relentless pace was revealed. After crossing a low vale with a rushing brook, Magua climbed a steep hill. The ascent was so difficult that the sisters were forced to dismount and follow on foot. When they reached the summit, they found a level space thinly scattered with trees. Beneath one of them, Magua cast himself down as if ready to claim the rest so greatly needed by all. The Indian had chosen a steep, pyramid-shaped hill. It looked like a man-made mound, common in American valleys. This one rose sharply, its top flattened, but one side was unusually jagged. Its only advantage lay in its height and shape. Easy to defend, hard to surprise. Yet Heyward, no longer hoping for rescue, saw no value in these features. He focused instead on comforting his weary companions. The Narragansett horses grazed on scattered branches and shrubs near the summit. Their leftover food was laid beneath a wide beech tree, its limbs stretched like a canopy overhead. Despite their swift escape, one Indian had managed to strike a lone fawn with an arrow. He carried the best parts of the animal on his shoulders all the way to the resting place. Without cooking, he joined the others in devouring the meat. Magua sat apart. He didn't touch the food. His mind seemed lost in deep thought. This strange restraint, rare for an Indian with food at hand, caught Heyward's attention. He assumed the Huron was planning a way to slip past his watchful allies. Hoping to help, and perhaps tempt him further, Heyward wandered from the beach. He moved aimlessly toward Le Renard's spot. He spoke with calm intent, suggesting Magua had faced the sun long enough to escape Canadian danger. He hinted that the chief of William Henry might welcome his daughters sooner, before grief hardened his heart and dulled his generosity. Magua responded coldly, questioning if palefaces loved their children less in the morning than at night. Heyward quickly corrected himself. He admitted that white men sometimes forget their ancestors' graves. They may neglect those they vowed to cherish, but a parent's love for a child never dies. Magua pressed further. He asked if the white-haired chief had a soft heart. Would he think of the children born to his squaws? He claimed the chief was harsh with warriors, his eyes like stone. Heyward defended him. He said the chief was strict with the wicked, but fair to the worthy, a just and humane leader. He had seen many loving fathers, but none more tender than this man. Magua had seen him lead in battle. Heyward had seen tears in his eyes when speaking of the children now held by the Huron. Heyward paused. Magua's face showed a strange gleam. At first, it seemed the promise of reward stirred in him. But as Duncan spoke, that joy twisted into something darker. A fierce, sinister look replaced it. Not greed, something worse. Then, with sudden calm, Magua spoke. His face turned cold. He told Heyward to go to the dark-haired daughter, to say Magua waited to speak. The father would remember what the child had promised. Duncan believed Magua's words hinted at a need for further assurance, a pledge to secure the promised gifts. Slowly, and with reluctance, he walked toward the resting sisters. His task was to share the message with Cora. As they moved together, he reminded her of the nature of an Indian's desires. Powder and blankets were expected, but strong spirits held the highest value. A personal token, offered with grace, might help. He urged her to stay composed. Her cleverness could shape their fate. Even their lives might depend on it. Cora reminded him that his life mattered too. But Duncan dismissed the thought. His life belonged to his king. It was a prize for any enemy strong enough to claim it. He had no father waiting, few friends to mourn him. He had chased danger with youthful hunger for glory. Then he hushed. They had reached the Indian. Magua's chosen lady stood before him. Magua rose slowly, silent, still. After a long pause, he gestured for Heyward to leave. His voice was cold. When a Huron spoke to women, his tribe did not listen. Duncan hesitated, but Cora, calm and composed, urged him to go. She asked him to comfort Alice. Their hopes were rising again. Once alone, Cora turned to Magua. Her voice held quiet strength. She asked what Le Renard wished to say to Munro's daughter. Magua placed a firm hand on her arm. He wanted her full attention, but Cora gently pulled away. Magua began his tale. He was born a chief among the red Hurons of the lakes. 20 summers and winters passed before he saw a pale face. He had been happy. Then came the Canada Fathers. They brought fire water. Magua drank. He changed. The Hurons cast him out, chased him like a buffalo. He fled along the lakes, reached the city of Cannon. There he hunted and fished. But again, he was driven away, into the arms of enemies. The Huron chief became a Mohawk warrior. Cora had heard parts of this story before. She saw him struggle to contain the fire of old wounds. Magua asked if it was his fault his head wasn't made of stone. Who gave him the fire water? Who turned him into a villain? It was the pale faces. Her people. Cora responded with calm. She asked if she must answer for the reckless men who looked like her. Magua said no. She was wise. Her kind did not drink the burning stream. The Great Spirit had given her wisdom. Cora asked what she could do, what she could say about his misfortunes or his mistakes. Magua urged her to listen. When the English and French raised their weapons, Le Renard joined the Mohawks. He fought his own people. The pale faces had stolen the hunting grounds. Now they led the battles. Her father, the old chief at Mohicans, had commanded their war party. He gave orders. The Mohawks obeyed. He made a law. If an Indian drank fire water and entered the warriors' cloth wigwams, he would be punished. Magua drank. The liquor led him into Munro's cabin. What did the gray head do? Magua asked her to answer. Cora stayed silent. She couldn't find words to soften her father's harsh actions in a way the Indian might understand. Magua pulled aside the thin calico covering his chest. Beneath it, painted skin revealed scars from knives and bullets. These, he said, were marks a warrior could show with pride. But the ones left by the gray-haired chief were different. They stained his back. Shameful, hidden like a squaw beneath white man's cloth. Cora spoke again. She had believed Indian warriors were patient, that their spirits ignored the pain of the flesh. Magua pointed to a deep scar. The Chippewas had tied him to a stake and cut him there. He had laughed in their faces, called their strikes light. His spirit had soared, but Munro's blows were different. They crushed him. His spirit lay beneath the birch. A Huron's spirit never drinks. It remembers forever. Cora tried to reason. If her father had wronged him, let Magua show forgiveness. Let him return the daughters. She reminded him of Major Heyward's words. But Magua shook his head. He rejected the offers. Cora paused. A painful silence. She began to see Duncan's hope had been a cruel illusion. The savage had deceived them. Magua spoke again. A Huron gives good for good, bad for bad. Cora understood. He wanted revenge, not justice. She asked if it wouldn't be nobler to face Munro directly, to seek satisfaction like a warrior. Magua laughed darkly. The pale faces had long arms. Their knives were sharp. Why walk into their muskets when he already held the old chief's spirit in his grasp? Cora steadied herself. She asked what he truly intended. Would he take them as prisoners into the woods? Or did he plan something worse? Was there no reward, no way to ease the pain and soften his heart? She begged for Alice's release. Let her go. Let Magua take his revenge on one alone. The loss of both daughters might kill their father. What satisfaction would remain then? Magua told her to listen. The light-eyed sister could return a hurricane. She could tell the old chief what had happened, but only if the dark-haired woman swore by her ancestors' great spirit to speak no lie. Cora asked what she must promise. Her voice remained calm. Her presence held quiet power. Magua explained. When he left his people, his wife was given to another chief. Now, he had made peace with the Hurons. He would return to his tribe's graves by the Great Lake. He wanted the English chief's daughter to follow, to live in his wigwam forever. The proposal disgusted Cora, but she held her composure. She replied without showing weakness. What joy would Magua find in a wife he didn't love? One from a different nation, a different color. Better to take Munro's gold. Use it to win the heart of a Huron maiden. The Indian said nothing for nearly a minute. His fierce gaze flickered across Cora's face. The shifting look unsettled her. Her eyes dropped in shame. For the first time, she felt a stare no modest woman should endure. She shrank inward, dreading something even more vile than before. Then, Magua's voice broke the silence. It carried a deep, venomous tone. He spoke of pain and vengeance. He imagined the daughter of Munro serving him, drawing water, tending crops, cooking meat. He pictured Munro's body resting among cannons, while his heart lay exposed to the knife of Le Subtle. Cora's spirit flared. Her voice rose in fierce defiance. She condemned the cruelty. She warned that Magua had underestimated the strength of the heart he held. But the Indian only smiled, a ghastly grin, his purpose unchanged. He waved her away, ending the talk. Cora, already regretting her outburst, had no choice but to leave. Magua turned and walked toward his gluttonous companions. Heyward rushed to Cora's side. He had watched the exchange with deep concern. He asked what had passed, but Cora, not wanting to alarm Alice, gave no clear answer. Her anxious eyes stayed fixed on their captors. Alice pressed her with questions. Cora only pointed toward the dark group. Her voice trembled as she held her sister close. Her words were few, but heavy with meaning. Her actions spoke louder than speech. The others followed her gaze, sensing the weight of what was at stake. Magua reached the band of savages. They lay sprawled on the ground, bloated from their vile feast. He stood tall, speaking with the pride of a chief. His first words made them sit up. Their posture shifted. Respect returned. He spoke in his native tongue. The prisoners, though kept close, could only guess his meaning. They watched his gestures. They read the story in his movements. At first, his tone was calm, deliberate. He pointed often toward the Great Lakes. Heyward guessed he spoke of their homeland. The tribe listened. Their voices rose in approval. They praised his words with deep, guttural sounds. Magua pressed on. He spoke of their long journey, of the battles fought for their Canadian allies. He named each warrior. He praised their deeds, their wounds, their trophies. Each man he mentioned beamed with pride. They nodded, confirming his words with gestures of agreement. Then his voice softened. The triumph faded. He described the falls of glens, the rocky island, the caves, the rapids and whirlpools. He spoke the name La Long Carabin. The forest echoed with a wild, hateful cry. He pointed at the young soldier. He told of a warrior's death, a man thrown into the ravine. He acted out the horror, the fall, the struggle, the end. He recalled each loss, each brave soul, each virtue. His voice changed again. It grew low, almost musical. He spoke of the widows, the children, their hunger, their sorrow, their distance, their pain, their thirst for justice. Then, with a sudden roar, he demanded vengeance. He asked if the Hurons were dogs, if they would return home empty-handed, if they would face their women with clean hands. He cried that their shame must be washed in blood. The forest exploded with rage. Though few in number, their cries filled the woods. The prisoners saw it all in the warriors' faces. They had mourned with him, nodded at his truths, swelled with pride at his praise. Their eyes burned with fury, their heads dropped in shame. But when he spoke of revenge, something ignited. As one, the Hurons leapt to their feet. Their knives flashed, their tomahawks rose. They charged the prisoners in a frenzy. Heyward threw himself between the sisters and the nearest attacker. His grip was fierce. It halted the blow. That moment gave Magua time. He stepped in. His voice rang out. His gestures commanded attention. He turned their fury aside. He urged them to wait, to savor the suffering. The band cheered. His plan was accepted and carried out in an instant. Two fierce warriors lunged at Heyward. Another seized the less active singing master. Neither captive gave in easily. Both fought with desperate strength. Even David threw his attacker to the ground. Heyward resisted until the other was subdued. Then, the full force of the Indians turned on him. He was bound tightly to the sapling, the same one Magua had used to mimic the fall of a dying Huron. When Heyward regained consciousness, the truth was clear. A shared fate awaited them all. To his right stood Cora. She was tied like him, pale, shaken, but her eyes stayed sharp. She watched every move of their enemies. To his left, Alice was bound to a pine. Her trembling legs could no longer hold her. The ropes alone kept her upright. Her hands were clasped in prayer. Yet her gaze didn't rise to the heavens. It drifted to Duncan's face. She leaned on him with childlike trust. David had fought, but now he stood silent. The strangeness of the moment left him deep in thought. He pondered the meaning of what had just occurred. The Hurons' vengeance shifted. It grew darker, more cruel. They prepared their punishment with ancient skill. Some gathered wood for a burning pile. One split pine into sharp slivers, ready to scorch flesh. Others bent 2 saplings to the ground. They planned to suspend Heyward between them, his arms stretched by the force of the trees. But Magua's revenge ran deeper. His desire was more twisted, more personal. As the cruelest of the band readied their tools of torment, right before the eyes of their victims, one figure stepped toward Cora, his face twisted with malice, revealing the grim fate he had planned for her. He mocked her lineage, her dignity, and her future. His words dripped with venom, painting a picture of death and disgrace. Cora stood firm, her disgust visible, her spirit unshaken. Heyward, stunned by the savage's cruelty, questioned the meaning behind the threats. But Cora, calm and resolute, dismissed the barbarity. She urged compassion, even in their final moments, praying for the savage's redemption. The Huron misunderstood her mercy, twisting it into insult. He offered a grim bargain, Alice's life in exchange for Cora's submission. Cora recoiled, her voice solemn and steady. She asked him to leave, his presence tainting her prayers. Yet the savage pressed on, mocking Alice's tears, suggesting she return to her father to comfort his aging heart. Cora turned to her sister, drawn by the silent plea in Alice's eyes. Alice, trembling, asked if she might be spared. Cora, torn by emotion, revealed the offer, life for them all, even Duncan, if she would surrender her pride and become the savage's wife. Her voice faltered. She looked skyward, seeking strength from higher wisdom. Alice, desperate, wished the choice had been hers. She would gladly give her life to save them. Cora, steadier now, explained the full weight of the proposal. She would be taken to the Huron lands to live among them as his wife. She turned to Alice and Duncan, pleading for guidance. Was life worth such a price? Could they accept it, knowing the cost? Duncan, outraged, rejected the idea. His voice thundered with disbelief. Cora, unsurprised, turned to Alice, ready to yield if her sister willed it. Silence followed. Alice stood motionless, her body trembling, her spirit shaken. Her arms hung limp, her head bowed. She looked like a fragile symbol of wounded innocence. Then, slowly, she moved. Her head nodded in quiet defiance. Her answer was clear. Better to die together than live in shame. Magua, enraged by her resolve, hurled his tomahawk. It sliced the air, grazing Alice's hair, and lodged in the tree above her. Duncan, driven by fury, broke free. He lunged at another savage, grappling and falling to the ground. His opponent slipped from his grasp, rose, and pinned him down. A knife flashed above Duncan's chest until a rifle cracked. The weight vanished. The savage's face turned blank. He collapsed, lifeless, beside Duncan. The Hurons froze in shock. One of their own had fallen, struck down with deadly precision. Every voice cried out the name La Longue Carabine, followed by a mournful, wild howl. From a nearby thicket came a fierce shout. It was the place where the careless warriors had left their weapons. Hawkeye emerged, too impatient to reload. He charged forward, swinging his rifle like a club, slicing the air with powerful strokes. But even his speed was outmatched. A lean, agile figure darted past him. With fearless energy, it leapt into the heart of the Hurons. There it stood, spinning a tomahawk and flashing a knife, threatening all who dared approach Cora. Before anyone could react, another form appeared, dressed in the symbols of death. It took position beside the first. The savage tormentors stepped back, startled by the sudden arrival. Their cries rang out again, naming the feared warriors, Loose Surf Agile, Le Gros Serpent. Yet the Huron leader remained calm. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, grasping the situation instantly. With a fierce shout, he drew his long blade and charged at Chingachgook. His cries signaled the start of battle. No guns were drawn. This fight would be brutal, hand to hand, weapon against weapon, with no shield to protect. Uncas answered the battle cry with fury. He leapt onto a foe and struck with precision. His tomahawk split the enemy's skull in one clean blow. Heyward, burning with urgency, tore Magua's weapon from the tree and charged into the fight. The numbers were now even. Each warrior faced his match. Blades clashed and bodies collided with the speed of lightning and the force of a storm. Hawkeye found another target. His rifle, swung like a club, shattered the weak defenses of his opponent and crushed him to the ground. Heyward, too impatient to wait, hurled his tomahawk. It struck the Huron's forehead and halted his charge. Fueled by this small victory, Heyward lunged forward with bare hands. But the moment he engaged, he realized his mistake. The Huron's knife came fast and fierce. Heyward struggled to block the deadly thrusts. Desperate, he wrapped his arms around the savage, locking him in a draining grip. He couldn't hold on for long. Then came a voice, loud and commanding. Exterminate the varlets. No quarter to an accursed Mingo. Hawkeye's rifle crashed down on the Huron skull. The blow drained the life from the savage, who collapsed limp in Duncan's arms. Uncas, having slain his first foe, turned like a lion in search of more. One Huron, still free, paused briefly. Seeing the chaos around him, he chose vengeance. With a triumphant cry, he charged at Cora. His axe flew ahead, slicing her bindings and grazing her shoulder. Freed, Cora ran to Alice. She clung to her sister, trying to break the twigs that held her. Her fingers trembled, her movements frantic. Any heart but a monster's would have softened. But the Huron knew no mercy. He grabbed Cora by her tangled hair and forced her to her knees. He lifted her curls high and traced his knife around her head, laughing with cruel delight. That moment cost him dearly. Uncas saw him. In a flash, the young Mohican flew through the air and slammed into the savage's chest. Both fell hard, rolling across the ground. They rose together, locked in brutal combat. Blood was spilled, blows exchanged, but the end came swiftly. Heyward's tomahawk and Hawkeye's rifle struck the Huron skull. At the same instant, Uncas's knife pierced his heart. The battle had ended, except for the fierce clash between Lou Renard Subtle and Le Gros Serpent. These warriors lived up to their fearsome names, earned in past wars. Their fight began with swift dodges and sharp thrusts, each trying to strike the other down. Then in a sudden rush, they collided. They fell to the ground, tangled like serpents, their bodies twisting in silent fury. A cloud of dust and leaves marked their struggle, drifting across the plain like a passing whirlwind. Heyward and his companions, driven by love, loyalty, and gratitude, rushed toward the haze. They surrounded the swirling dust, desperate to help. Uncas circled the cloud, ready to strike. Hawkeye raised his rifle, but held back. Duncan reached for the Huron, his hands trembling and weak. The fighters, covered in blood and dust, moved so fast their bodies seemed fused. The Mohican's pale form and the Huron's dark figure flashed in and out of view. Their friends couldn't tell where to strike. At moments, Magua's fiery eyes pierced through the dust, like a basilisk's deadly gaze. He read the battle's fate in those brief glances. But before anyone could strike him, Chingachgook's fierce face replaced his. The fight shifted toward the edge of the plain. Chingachgook found his chance. His knife struck deep. Magua let go and fell back, lifeless. The Mohican rose, his cry of triumph echoing through the forest. Hawkeye lifted his rifle again, proud of the victory. He praised the Mohicans, declaring that a true warrior's final blow never dishonors him, nor denies him the right to the scalp. Just then, Magua sprang to life. He rolled away from danger, slipped over the cliff's edge, and landed on his feet. With one leap, he vanished into a thicket of bushes. The Delawares, thinking him dead, cried out in shock. They chased after him, loud and fast, like hounds chasing a deer. But a sharp cry from the scout stopped them. He called them back to the hilltop. Hawkeye, ever distrustful of the Mingos, scoffed at Magua's escape. He called him deceitful, unlike an honest Delaware who would accept defeat. He said Magua clung to life like a wildcat. But he was alone now, without weapons, far from his allies. Like a rattlesnake without fangs, he posed no threat for now. Hawkeye pointed to Uncas, noting that his father was already claiming the scalps. He urged caution, suggesting they check the fallen, lest another enemy rise and flee screeching through the woods. With calm resolve, the scout walked among the dead. He thrust his knife into their lifeless bodies, as if they were mere beasts. Yet Chingachgook had already acted. The elder Mohican had taken the symbols of victory from the heads of the slain. Uncas, setting aside his usual reserve, moved with quiet grace. Guided by instinct and compassion, he rushed to the women, Heyward close behind. He gently freed Alice and placed her into Cora's waiting arms. The sisters, overwhelmed with emotion, offered silent thanks to the divine. Their hearts burned with gratitude, too deep for words. Their embrace, long and tender, spoke louder than any prayer. Alice, still on her knees, clung to Cora. Her voice trembled as she whispered their father's name. Tears sparkled in her eyes, filled with hope. She rejoiced in their survival, in the thought of returning to their father's arms. Her joy overflowed as she looked to Cora, calling her not just a sister, but a mother. Then her gaze turned to Duncan. A soft smile lit her face, grateful that he too, was unharmed. Cora said nothing. She only held Alice tighter, her heart melting with love. Heyward, though a soldier, shed tears without shame. Uncas stood nearby, his body still marked by battle. He watched in silence, his fierce eyes now softened. In that moment, he seemed to rise above his people's ways, touched by a deeper understanding. While emotions flowed freely, Hawkeye remained alert. Once sure the Hurons posed no more threat, he turned to David. The scout cut his bonds, freeing the patient singer at last. "There," said Hawkeye, tossing aside the last rope. "You've got your limbs back, though you still don't use them wisely. If you'll take advice from a man of the woods, trade that little horn of yours for a weapon. Even a pistol barrel would serve you better. A crow may be ugly, but it clears the dead. That bird of yours only stirs up noise and confusion." David, now free, responded with calm dignity. He raised his thin hand in thanks, his eyes moist with emotion. He praised the scout's bravery and gave thanks for his own life. Though he hadn't fought, it was not from fear, but from being bound. He honored Hawkeye with words of Christian gratitude, calling him worthy of praise. Hawkeye, softened by the thanks, replied modestly. He patted his rifle, killdeer, proud to have it back. The Iroquois had been clever, but they'd made a mistake hiding the weapons. If Uncas or his father had waited longer, they could have struck harder. Still, he believed all had happened as it was meant to. David agreed, his voice calm. He spoke of salvation and fate. To him, the path of the soul was already written. Those meant to be saved would be saved. Those doomed would meet their end. And in that truth, he found peace. Hawkeye sat quietly, tending to his rifle with care that felt almost parental. But when David spoke again, the scout looked up, his displeasure plain. He cut him off sharply, unwilling to hide his irritation. To Hawkeye, doctrines were the refuge of scoundrels and a burden to honest men. He believed the Huron had fallen by his own hand. He'd seen it. But he refused to accept that Magua had earned any reward, or that Chingachgook would face condemnation in the afterlife. David, steeped in the complex theology of his time and region, bristled at the scout's bold claim. He accused Hawkeye of building his beliefs on sand, easily washed away by truth. He demanded proof, chapter and verse, from sacred texts to support such harsh views. Like many who argued from rigid systems, David's words weren't always precise. Hawkeye scoffed at the idea of books. He mocked the notion, comparing his rifle to a quill, his horn to an ink bottle, and his pouch to a napkin. He had no use for books. He was a man of the wild, not of the cross. He'd read only one book, the wilderness itself. Its lessons were clear, its truths simple. 40 years in the forest had taught him more than any printed page. David misunderstood, asking what volume the scout meant. Hawkeye pointed to the world around them. Nature was a scripture. He'd heard of men needing books to believe in God. But in the forest, God's presence was undeniable. If any doubted, let them walk with him from dawn to dusk. They'd see enough to know their folly, trying to match a power they could never reach. Realizing Hawkeye's faith came from nature, not doctrine, David let the argument go. He saw no gain in continuing. He sat down, pulled out his small book and spectacles, and prepared to sing. Only the earlier challenge to his beliefs had delayed him. David was a minstrel of his time, not of ancient courts, but of the American frontier. He sang not of lords, but of faith and gratitude. He waited for Hawkeye to finish, then lifted his voice and eyes. He invited all to join in praise for their deliverance from danger. The tune was called Northampton. He named the page and verse, then used his pitch pipe with solemn grace, just as he would in a church. Though the sisters were lost in their own quiet joy, and the scout remained his only listener, David sang. Alone, but undeterred, he completed the sacred song without pause or error. Hawkeye listened in silence as he adjusted the flint and reloaded his rifle. The sounds around him, stripped of setting and sympathy, stirred no feeling in his heart. David's song rose with sincerity, yet it fell on ears that cared little. Still, his notes seemed to reach higher than any worldly tune, as if lifted toward a throne of praise. The scout shook his head, muttering words where only throat and Iroquois could be heard. He turned away to inspect the captured weapons of the Hurons. Chingachgook soon joined him, reclaiming his own rifle and that of his son. Even Heyward and David found themselves armed, with powder and shot enough to make their weapons useful. When the foresters had chosen and shared their arms, Hawkeye declared it was time to move. By then, David's song had ended, and the sisters had quieted their emotions. With Duncan and the younger Mohican guiding them, the women descended the steep hill they had climbed under such different hopes. Its summit had nearly been their place of death. At the base, they found an Narragansett horses grazing. Mounting quickly, they followed their guide, who had so often proved a friend in danger. The march was short. Hawkeye left the trail of the Hurons, turned sharply into a thicket, crossed a murmuring brook, and halted in a shaded dell beneath water elms. They were only a few rods from the fatal hill, and the horses had served only to cross the shallow stream. The scout and his companions seemed to know this hidden spot well. Resting their rifles against the trees, they cleared away leaves and opened the clay until a bright spring bubbled forth. Hawkeye searched for something he could not at first find. His temper rose as he saw the marks of Mohawks and their allies, who had drunk here and left the place spoiled. He grumbled at their waste, calling them thoughtless and ungrateful, for they had trampled the clay and ruined the clean spring, as if they were beasts instead of men. Uncas quietly handed him the gourd, hanging unseen on a branch. Hawkeye filled it, stepped to firmer ground, and drank deeply. Then he examined the scraps of food left by the Hurons, carried in a small wallet. He thanked Uncas, returned a gourd, and studied the venison. The Hurons had chosen the best cuts, yet left them raw. He called them savages, unskilled in roasting even the finest meat. He ordered Uncas to strike a fire, saying that a tender broil would restore their strength after the long trail. Heyward, seeing the meal prepared in earnest, helped the sisters dismount. He stayed close to them, glad for a moment of rest after the bloody struggle. As the fire was kindled, his curiosity led him to ask how their guides had arrived so quickly, without help from the fort. Hawkeye explained that had they gone to the river bend, they would have been too late to save lives, though in time to bury bodies. Instead, they had hidden by the Hudson, watching the Hurons. Heyward pressed further, asking if they had seen all that passed. Hawkeye replied that they had not seen everything, for Indian eyes were sharp, and they had kept well concealed. He added that it had been hard to keep young Uncas still in the ambush, for his eagerness was more like that of a curious woman than a warrior on the scent. Uncas turned his eyes for a moment toward the speaker's stern face. He gave no sign of regret. To Heyward, the young Mohican's look seemed proud, even fierce, as if he held back passions ready to burst, restrained only out of respect for his companions and his white ally. The capture had been heard, not seen. The cries of the Hurons were clear to men of the forest. Forced to crawl like serpents beneath the leaves, the rescuers lost sight of the prisoners until they found them bound to the trees, awaiting death. Their deliverance seemed the work of Providence, for the Hurons had divided, each band with its horses, and the trail might easily have been lost. Uncas had guided them when the path grew uncertain. Though all the tracks bore moccasin prints, and the captives had been shod to match, the young Mohican's judgment prevailed. Hawkeye admitted, with some shame, that the wisdom of the youth had surpassed his own. Uncas had noticed that the horses of the sisters moved in a strange way, placing both legs of one side down together, unlike any trotting beast save the bear. The trail of these Narragansett horses stretched for 20 miles, leading the rescuers on. Heyward explained the breed, famed in Providence plantations for endurance and their smooth, sidling gait. Hawkeye listened with care, confessing that his skill lay more with deer and beaver than with horses. The Mohicans paused their work to hear, the father voicing his surprise, while the scout pondered this new knowledge and studied the animals again. He remarked that man often bent nature to his will, but Uncas had seen the truth, and the trail had led them to a broken bush. One branch was bent upward, as if by a lady's hand, while the rest were torn roughly, as though by men seeking to deceive. The scout judged rightly that the Hurons had tried to hide their passage. He believed they would push toward the spring, for its waters were well known. Heyward looked about the secluded dell, curious at its fame. Few travelers of the wilderness were ignorant of its virtue. He tasted the water, but found it bitter. The scout laughed quietly, saying that habit gave it flavor, and that he now craved it as a deer craves the salt licks. With the fire kindled by Uncas, Hawkeye reminded them it was time to eat, for the journey ahead was long. The scout broke off the talk and turned at once to the scraps of food left behind by the Hurons. The cooking was simple and swift. Soon he and the Mohicans ate in silence, with the steady focus of men who fed only to gain strength for hard and endless labor. When the meal was done, each forester bent low and drank deeply from the lonely spring. That quiet fountain, destined in later years to draw crowds in search of health and pleasure, now gave refreshment only to a weary few. Rising from the water, Hawkeye declared it was time to move. The sisters mounted their horses once more. Duncan and David took up their rifles. The scout led the way, while the Mohicans guarded the rear. Together, they pressed forward along the narrow northern path. Behind them, the spring flowed on, its healing waters joining nearby brooks. On a hill above, the bodies of the fallen lay untended, denied the rites of burial. Such was the common fate of warriors in the wilderness, stirring neither pity nor remark among those who had survived. And so, this chapter closes with quiet grace. But the story? It still breathes. Every decision, every hushed moment, every pulse of emotion remains, waiting to be felt again. If this journey stirred something within you, we invite you to stand with us. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help us weave more tales that echo through time, one story at a time. Come back soon. Step once more into realms of courage, longing, and fate. Because stories like these aren't just told, they're remembered.